She's gone. We move. 6 words. Ryan Cole didn't even look back down at the avalanche debris when he said them. He was already turning north, already crossing her name off the list like she'd never existed at all. Beneath 10 feet of frozen snow, Emma Frost heard every single word through the ice. Her own team, walking away, leaving her to die alone in the dark while they marched off to save everyone else. She had one good arm, no oxygen to spare, and exactly one choice left: surrender to the mountain or claw her way back to the men who just buried her alive and make every last one of them regret it. Subscribe now, follow this story to the very end, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far Emma's story travels. The mission brief had been simple enough on paper. 3 American humanitarian workers, a doctor, a logistics coordinator, and a young translator, barely 22 years old, had been seized from their field station in the Brooks Range by a militia group operating out of an abandoned copper mining complex 60 miles north of any paved road. The group had no formal name, no political demands, and no discernible ideology beyond territory weapons, and a long history of violence against anyone who ventured too deep into the range without their permission. Washington wanted them back. Alaska Command wanted it quiet. And so a joint special operations team had been assembled with the specific instruction that they would insert by helicopter, move on foot, secure the hostages, and extract before the weather window closed. The weather window, as it turned out, was 11 hours. Nobody had built in any margin for error. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole had read the brief 3 times on the flight north and decided he already knew everything he needed to know. 20 years of service. 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Syria, a handful of classified operations that didn't appear on any official record. He had led Rangers through ambushes, through IED belts, through 3-day firefights with no resupply and no air support. He had carried his men out of situations that should have killed every last one of them. He was not a man who doubted himself. He was also not a man who spent much time wondering whether he might be wrong. When the team assembled at Fort Richardson for the final pre-mission briefing, Ryan had been expecting 12 Rangers, 2 communications specialists, and a combat medic from his own battalion. What he had not been expecting was the woman standing near the back wall with her gear already packed and her expression completely unreadable. She was small, 5'4", maybe 5'5", dark hair pulled tight, young late 20s at the absolute oldest. She wore a Navy service uniform with the rank of Petty Officer First Class and a sealed trident on her chest that several of the Rangers noticed immediately and said nothing about because they were not sure yet whether the silence was more polite or more efficient. Petty Officer Emma Frost, the briefing officer announced without ceremony. Navy Special Operations. She's been temporarily attached to the Joint Medical Support element and will be accompanying the team as your primary trauma medic. Ryan looked at her the way a man looks at a weather report he doesn't trust. What's her field experience? The briefing officer glanced down. Classified. Meaning classified sergeant. She goes with the team. Ryan said nothing else. But the look he exchanged with his senior NCO Master Sergeant Todd Briggs spoke every word he had chosen not to say out loud. Briggs leaned close as the room shifted and personnel began final equipment checks. You think they sent us a mascot? I think headquarters thinks having a woman on the team looks good in the after-action report, Ryan murmured. I think she'll need to be kept away from the direct action elements. I think we'll have to watch out for her. Across the room, Emma Frost heard none of this. She was checking her med kit, tourniquet placement, hemostatic gauze count, airway kit, IV supplies, chest seals. She had checked it 3 times already. She was checking it a 4th. She had a habit of being thorough. She had been thorough her entire life, partly by temperament and partly because her mother had drummed thoroughness into her with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. Her mother, Margaret Frost, Maggie, to the few people she allowed close enough to use a first name, had been raised in the Brooks Range herself, daughter of an Athabascan trapper and a woman from Fairbanks who had married into the wilderness and never fully adjusted. Maggie had adjusted. Maggie had thrived. She had learned to read the mountains the way other people read books, understanding their moods and their signals and their capacity for sudden catastrophic violence. She had then spent 20 years in the military, risen to the rank of Chief Warrant Officer, qualified as a sniper, and upon retiring had returned to Alaska to train anyone willing to suffer enough to learn from her. Her daughter had been her most demanding student. Emma had grown up in those mountains. She had learned to navigate in whiteout conditions before she turned 14. She had learned avalanche terrain at 15 cornice formation, at 16 the specific silence of a snowpack preparing to fail at 17. She had learned these things not in a classroom or from a manual, but from standing on actual ridge lines in actual wind, with her mother's hand on her shoulder and her mother's voice in her ear, explaining patiently, and then not so patiently, what the mountain was telling them. When she joined the Navy at 20, her recruiters had assumed she would go into logistics or medicine. They had been surprised when she requested SEAL training. They had been more surprised when she completed it. They had been most surprised when her sniper qualification scores came back, and nobody on the range could immediately explain how a 5'4" woman from Alaska had just broken a record that had stood for 11 years. Emma had not offered to explain it. She simply reloaded and kept shooting. The insertion went smoothly enough. 4 helicopters staggered approach, landing on a frozen lake bed 6 miles south of the mining complex. The team moved north in good order. Ryan set a hard pace and Emma matched it without comment, her pack as heavy as anyone else's, her movement precise and economical in the way that belongs to people who learn to walk in deep snow before they learn to run on pavement. The rangers around her had not spoken to her much. Not hostility or not exactly hostility. More the particular wariness that forms between soldiers who have not yet decided whether someone is going to be an asset or a liability. Several of them had glanced at her trident when they thought she wasn't looking. One of them, a young corporal named Marcus Webb, had actually been decent enough to introduce himself and shake her hand. "Webb," he said, "you've been to Alaska before." "I grew up here," Emma said. Webb blinked. "Here like here in the mountains. South of the range, we used to spend winters up near the headwaters." He stared at her. "Your family chose to spend winters up here. My mother thought it built character." "Your mother sounds terrifying." Emma almost smiled. She'd take that as a compliment. They had been on the ground 3 hours and moving for 2.5 when Emma saw the ridge. Devil's Spine, the maps called it a long, serrated line of elevation running east to west that the team needed to cross to approach the mining complex from the south. It was the fastest route. It was also, Ryan had decided, the only route worth considering because the alternatives added 3 hours to the approach and ate directly into the extraction window. Emma studied the ridge as they drew closer. She studied the shape of the cornice that had formed along the upper lip, the overhanging shelf of snow that built up on the lee side of ridges during heavy wind, dense and heavy, and adhered to the slope by nothing more than the accumulated weight of its own structure, pressing against a substrate of older, weaker snow beneath. She watched the way a thin cracking sound moved through the upper snowfield when the wind shifted. She measured the angle of the slope below the cornice against the angle she had learned to fear. She felt something her mother had once described as the mountain talking. She moved up beside Ryan. "Sergeant Cole, I need to say something about the ridge." Ryan didn't slow his pace. "What about it?" "That cornice." She nodded upward toward the overhanging shelf of snow. "It's unstable. The wind shifted about 40 minutes ago, and you can hear the settlement fractures if you stop and listen. The snowpack underneath is weak. You can tell from the hollow sound when you pull test it. If we put 12 people on that slope, frost." Ryan's voice was patient the way a teacher is patient with a student who has asked the same question twice. "I've crossed ridge lines in worse shape than this in Afghanistan. The cornice is fine. It's been holding all winter." "Sergeant, I grew up on ridges like this. My mother trained." "I don't care about your mother. Not cruel, just final. We're on a timeline. The window closes in 8 hours. We cross." She stopped walking for just a moment. Then she moved. Not forward with the rest of the team. Sideways, angling along the base of the slope toward a position slightly below and to the east of the crossing point. Not far enough to draw attention. Far enough that if something happened, she would be at the edge rather than the center. Behind her, Corporal Webb had been watching this exchange. He fell into step beside her. "You really think it's bad?" "I think we should have gone around," Emma said quietly. "But if you're wrong, you've just slowed down the whole mission." "Yes. And if you're right," Emma watched the ridge above them, watched the hairline tension running through the lip of the cornice like a drawn bowstring. "Then I hope everyone pays attention to where they're standing." Webb looked at the ridge, then at her. "Should I?" "Stay close to me," Emma said, "and stay east." The first rangers were already on the slope. Ryan led from the front, as he always did, because he believed a leader who sent his men into uncertain terrain while he waited safely behind had no business calling himself a leader. He had always believed this. It was one of his genuinely admirable qualities. Today it meant he was directly beneath the cornice when it let go. The sound was not an explosion. It was more like the earth exhaling a deep, resonant crack, followed by a rushing silence that lasted exactly long enough for every man on that slope to understand what was about to happen, and not long enough for any of them to do anything about it. Then the mountain moved. Thousands of tons of compacted snow broke free from the upper ridge in a single slab and accelerated down the fall line faster than any of them could run, faster than any of them could think, a wall of white that swallowed sound and light in the distinction between up and down. Emma had already been watching Corporal Marcus Webb. He was 19 years old, she had learned during their brief conversation. From Georgia, he had a younger sister he called twice a week without exception. When she heard the crack, she had approximately 1.5 seconds. She used them. She covered the distance between herself and Webb in 3 strides, hit him with her full body weight, drove him sideways and down and east, toward the exposed rock outcropping at the edge of the slope, the one place the avalanche would divide, rather than swallow, and wrapped herself around him as the leading edge of the slide struck her like a freight train made of ice. The impact was beyond pain. It was beyond cold. It was simply force massive, incomprehensible, the kind of force that reminds the human body that the planet does not notice it. Webb hit the rocks and grabbed. His fingers found a crack in the stone. He held. Emma did not hold. She was already gone. The snow took her in an instant, 1 second there, visible and solid and fighting, and then simply erased, swallowed, buried beneath a torrent of white that poured over the rock face and cascaded down the mountain for nearly a full minute before finally going still. The silence that followed was absolute. Ryan pulled himself upright from where the edge of the slide had knocked him flat. He was shaking. He was not a man who shook easily, and the recognition of that fact made him angrier at himself than he had any time to process right now. He looked at his team, did a fast count, 11 standing, some cuts, some bruises, one man holding his arm at an angle that suggested a fracture but upright. 11, he counted again. Webb was on the rocks to the east, bleeding from his forehead, staring at the debris field below, with an expression Ryan had seen on men in the immediate seconds after violent contact, that specific hollow look of someone whose mind has not yet caught up with what their body just survived. "Sound off," Ryan called. They sounded off. 12 names, one name did not answer. "Frost," Ryan's voice carried across the debris field. Nothing came back. "Emma Frost," still nothing. He looked at Briggs. Briggs was already moving toward the edge of the deposit, probing with a ski pole. "She went under here, maybe 30 feet in, maybe more." Ryan stood at the edge of the debris and did the math he hated doing. Avalanche burial. Depth unknown but significant. The deposit was deep. The slide had been massive. Survival rates for buried casualties dropped sharply after 15 minutes. They were already past 2. They had no avalanche probes beyond the poles, no avalanche beacons. They had not packed them because the mission profile had not flagged this terrain as avalanche risk, because Ryan had assessed the crossing as acceptable, because he stopped that line of thought. "She have a beacon?" he asked Briggs. "Not military issue on this deployment." Ryan looked north, looked at the ridge, looked at the mountains beyond it, and the clock in his head ticking down the extraction window. He looked at Webb, who was still staring at the debris field with blood running freely down the side of his face and something in his eyes that was very close to accusation. "Sergeant," Webb said. His voice was strange, too controlled. "We should dig. We don't have the equipment to find her in this deposit hold, and we are running out of time. Her name is Frost, and we should dig." Ryan was quiet for a moment, a long moment, the kind that accumulates meaning. "She's gone, Webb." His voice had no cruelty in it. This was in some ways worse. It had the simple finality of arithmetic. "The mountain took her. We have 3 hostages waiting and 12 men to keep alive. We do not have the time or the capability to recover a body from this debris field." "She's not a body, why?" "She is now." Ryan was already turning north. "We move. 5 minutes to regroup and check equipment." "Move." Several of the Rangers exchanged glances. None of them said what Webb's expression was saying. Because Ryan was right about the math even when the math was unbearable. Because 20 years of combat experience had taught them that sometimes leaving people behind was the only way to bring anyone home. Because they were rangers, and they had been trained to absorb this kind of blow and keep walking. Webb looked at the debris field one final time. He said nothing, but he moved. And 11 soldiers walked north away from the mountain, away from the settled snow, away from the silence beneath it. Not one of them saw the small disturbance in the debris surface, perhaps 40 feet from where Emma had vanished, a slight depression barely visible where the snow had compressed slightly inward as something below it shifted. Not one of them heard beneath 10 feet of packed ice and compacted snow the very faint, very deliberate, very controlled sound of breathing. Emma was alive. She had known she might be alive for approximately 12 seconds before she was certain of it. The impact had been violent enough to cost her consciousness briefly. She thought briefly, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5. And when awareness returned, it arrived not all at once, but in pieces, the way it does when the body has been forced past the limits of normal experience and is slowly reassembling its understanding of what just happened. Dark, complete absolute dark. Cold. A cold that was already working inward through her layers, not the surface cold of wind, but the denser, more intimate cold of burial. Pressure on all sides. The snow had set around her in the way avalanche debris always sets, not loose and powdery, but consolidated dense, a medium that was nearly solid and weighed many thousands of pounds per square foot in aggregate. She was on her side, slightly curled. Her left arm was pinned. Her right arm had some movement less than 6 inches in any direction, but some. Her mother's voice came to her then, as it had a habit of doing at the worst and most useful moments of Emma's life. Spit, her mother had told her when Emma was 16, and they were lying in a snow pit. Margaret had dug specifically for this lesson with the snow packed around them to simulate burial depth. The moment you stop moving, spit. Gravity doesn't lie. Whichever direction spit falls is down. You need to know which way is up before you do anything else. Emma gathered moisture, spat, felt it fall against her left cheekbone. Down was left, up was right. She filed this. She then did the second thing her mother had taught her. She moved her face in small circles to clear a breathing space in front of her mouth, compressing the snow away from her lips and nose in every direction she could reach, working methodically without panic, because panic burns oxygen, and oxygen was already the most precious thing she possessed. Her air pocket was small. It would not last. She estimated her depth at 8 to 12 feet based on the pressure she felt and the complete absence of any light or sound from above. Digging straight up through 12 feet of consolidated avalanche debris, lone with one functional arm without tools, was not survivable in the conventional sense. Her mother had not taught her to think in conventional terms. She thought about the debris structure. Fresh avalanche deposits had layers, zones of varying consolidation depending on where material had originated and how it had traveled. The outer crust was always densest, but within the deposit, especially along the flow paths where snow had tumbled and fractured rather than slid as a slab, there were sometimes pockets, channels, weaker zones. She began to move her right arm in slow, deliberate arcs, feeling the resistance in different directions. Above and slightly west dense. Very dense. Above and east, slightly less dense. Directly above dense near her face, but with a slight give approximately 18 inches up, as though the debris had consolidated around an air gap. She focused on the give. She began to move. Not quickly. Quick movement burns oxygen, raises core temperature temporarily, and then drops it catastrophically and generates a desperation that is the enemy of precision. She moved the way her mother had taught her to move through deep wilderness in winter, steadily, patiently, with the specific economy of someone who understands that every action has a cost, and only the essential ones are worth paying. Her right hand compacted snow sideways. Her body shifted upward by a centimeter. She rested, breathed slow, compacted again, shifted, rested. The air pocket grew, fractionally, enough. 8 minutes after the avalanche, Emma Frost was still alive. 12 minutes after the avalanche, she had moved 4 inches upward. 15 minutes after the avalanche, Ryan Cole had already led his team a quarter-mile north and was pushing toward the mining complex. 22 minutes after the avalanche, Emma's right hand broke through the surface of the debris. She did not immediately follow it. She lay still for a full 60 seconds, breathing the sudden rush of fresh air, letting her body stabilize, checking her systems before committing to the final effort. Her left shoulder burned a deep structural pain that suggested the joint had been badly wrenched, if not dislocated. Her right knee throbbed with something she would not have time to evaluate properly until this was over. Her core temperature had dropped. Not dangerously. Not yet. She still had time. She clawed upward through the remaining compacted snow with the single-minded deliberateness of someone who has already decided quietly and without drama that the mountain does not get to win today. When she finally pulled herself to the surface and lay gasping on the debris field in the gray Alaskan morning light, she did not celebrate. She did not crumb. She did not look at the snow that had tried to kill her with anything beyond the flat, pragmatic assessment of someone cataloging what had happened in order to deal with what came next. Her team was gone. Ryan had left her. She had heard his voice faint through the snow during one of her brief pauses to conserve oxygen. She's gone. 3 words. No hesitation. No grief. The voice of a man who had already moved the name from one column to another and was focused on the next problem. She sat up, checked her kit. Her med bag was intact. The hard case had protected the contents through the impact. Her sidearm was still holstered. Her secondary blade was in her boot. Her radio was damaged beyond use. The housing had cracked in the impact, and she could get nothing but static. She looked north. The tracks of 11 boots led away through the snow, already beginning to blur at the edges as the wind worked at them. She could follow those tracks to the extraction point. Turn north, locate the helicopter. LZ, signal the pilot somehow wait. She was injured. She was alone. She had been buried alive by a mountain and had dug herself out with one good arm and no tools, and she had earned the right to go home. She thought about the 3 hostages in that mining complex. She thought about what would happen to them if the Rangers ran into serious trouble with no medic. She thought about Corporal Marcus Webb, 19 years old from Georgia, who called his sister twice a week. She put her pack on, adjusted the straps, exhaled once slow and steady. And Emma Frost began to walk north. Not toward extraction, toward the men who had left her behind. She did not think about Ryan's decision. She did not build anger around it, did not rehearse what she would say to him when she found him, did not nurse the feeling that was trying very hard to become bitterness, and that she was refusing methodically and deliberately to allow to take root. She thought about terrain. She thought about the tracks in front of her. She thought about the weather, which was shifting clouds thickening to the northwest, the barometric pressure dropping in the way she had learned to read before she learned to read text. Another system was building. She estimated 6 to 8 hours before the next weather wave arrived, which was also approximately the window before the extraction helicopter committed to its approach. The math was tight. It had always been tight. She moved faster. She had been on the ground maybe 90 minutes covering ground. She estimated at 3 miles slower than she would have moved on 2 good legs, but faster than anyone who had not spent a childhood in this terrain had any right to expect from an injured woman who had recently been buried alive when she heard the first gunshot. Then several more. Thwum. Then the distinctive, rapid percussion of automatic weapons fire coming from the valley below the northern ridge. She stopped, listened. It assessed direction and distance intensity. The Rangers had made contact. She started to run. Her knees screamed. She ran anyway, because somewhere below that ridge, 11 soldiers were in a fight, and someone down there was going to need a medic very soon. She came over the ridge with the wind in her face and the valley spread below her, and what she saw in the gray Alaskan morning stopped her for exactly 3 seconds, not from fear, but from the particular kind of clarity that descends when a situation resolves from abstract to concrete, and the mind suddenly sees exactly what must be done. 4 Rangers were down, not dead. She could see movement, the specific writhing motion of men in severe pain, still trying to function. The other 7, including Ryan, were in defensive positions behind the frozen vehicles and equipment of what looked like an old mining staging area, returning fire from 3 sides. The enemy had the high ground on the west. They had a sniper position on the north face, and they had a blocking force moving in from the east that was going to cut the Rangers off from their extraction route within 20 minutes unless something changed. Emma lay flat on the ridge, ignored the fire below, and studied the northern sniper position. The sniper had already dropped 2 Rangers. He was efficient, good angles, protected position. He would drop more unless something happens to change his equation. Emma drew her sidearm. The distance was long for a pistol, very long. The kind of distance where even experienced shooters would call the shot impossible and move on. Emma's mother had once made her practice pistol shooting at ranges that other instructors called unreasonable. Emma had called it Tuesday. She calculated the wind steady, consistent, slightly left. She calculated the elevation differential. She calculated the shooter's position relative to the rock that protected him and the narrow exposure angle that existed if she moved 6 feet to her left and changed her own angle of approach. She moved 6 feet left. She waited. The sniper shifted a small movement, barely visible, but she had been watching his position for 90 seconds and she knew what his settled posture looked like, which meant she knew the difference between that and adjustment. He was adjusting to a new target. Ryan had moved. The sniper was about to fire. Emma fired first. The shot crossed the valley and the space between heartbeats. She did not watch it land. She was already rolling right, changing position, going flat behind the ridge before anyone below enemy or ranger could triangulate where the sound had come from. Below, the sniper's rifle spun away from the rock face. Ryan looked up from his position, scanning for whoever had just done the impossible. He saw nothing but the ridge. He saw no one. The ghost they had buried alive had just saved his life, and she was not finished. Ryan Cole pressed his back against the frozen steel of an old ore cart and did not move for 3 full seconds. The sniper round that had been meant for his skull had passed through empty air approximately 1 heartbeat after he had shifted position to check on Briggs, and then before the enemy shooter could adjust. Something had happened that Ryan's 20 years of combat experience could not immediately categorize. The sniper's rifle had left his hands. Not because he had been killed. Ryan had watched enough men get shot to know the difference between a death and a disruption. The shooter had jerked backward, lost his weapon over the rock face, and gone down behind his position in the specific, graceless way of someone who has just taken a round somewhere painful but not immediately fatal. 1 pistol shot from the ridge, from a distance that a pistol shot had no business reaching with that kind of accuracy. Ryan looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at Ryan. "Who's on that ridge?" Briggs said. "Nobody," Ryan said. "Our whole team is in this valley." Neither of them said the next thing. The thing that was forming in both their minds with the slow, uncomfortable weight of something true that you don't want to be true yet. "Sarge." Corporal Webb was 3 positions to the left, bleeding from his forehead and from a new graze along his right forearm that he had not bothered to report. "Sarge, that shot came from the South Ridge." "I know where it came from." "We came from the South Ridge." "I know that too, Webb." Webb stared at him. "Then you know what that means." Ryan said nothing. He turned his attention back to the firefight because the firefight was still happening, and sentimentality in the middle of a firefight gets people killed. The eastern blocking force was still moving. The western high ground position still had 2 shooters he could see and possibly a third he couldn't. 3 of his 4 wounded men were in positions where another push from either flank would overrun them. He did not have time to think about who had fired from the ridge. He made himself not think about it. "Briggs, I need suppression on the west position. Webb, you and Kowalski push the eastern element back before they get to that gully. If they take the gully, we lose the extraction corridor. Move." They moved. Because Rangers move when they're told to move. Because the mission was still the mission, and the math was still the math. And somewhere north of their position, 3 hostages were waiting in the cold. But Webb, as he sprinted low across the frozen ground toward the eastern gully, looked once more at the South Ridge. He looked for a long time for a man running under fire. He saw nothing. Just gray sky and broken rock and the wind moving across empty snow. He made himself look away and kept running. On the ridge, Emma had already been gone for 4 minutes. She had not watched the aftermath of her shot. She had registered the rifle leaving the sniper's hands, registered the disruption in his position, done a fast threat calculation, disabled. Not eliminated, which meant she had bought minutes, not hours, and immediately begun moving east along the ridgeline toward a descent route she had identified during her approach. Her left shoulder was worsening. The joint had been wrong since the avalanche, and the crawl up through the debris had done it no favors. And now, with movement and cold combining against it, the pain had progressed from manageable to something she needed to actively manage rather than simply ignore. She reset her arm position against her body, secured it with her pack strap as an improvised brace, and kept moving. Her knee was holding. Barely. There was a grinding quality to the joint that she did not like and would not have adequate time to assess until this was over, but it was bearing weight, and that was what mattered. She found the descent route a rocky fall line cut through the south face of the valley wall and started down. The wind was picking up. She registered this with the part of her mind that was always running the weather calculation, the part her mother had trained to treat atmospheric conditions the way a chess player treats the board, not as background, but as active variable. The cloud system she had clocked building to the northwest had accelerated. The temperature had dropped another 3 degrees in the last hour. The light had that specific flat quality that preceded heavy snowfall. The weather window was closing faster than anyone had planned for. Below, the firefight had intensified. She could hear it more clearly now as she descended the distinct cadence of the engagement, the Ranger rifles and the enemy weapons trading back and forth in the irregular rhythm of a fight that had not found its resolution yet. She heard a sound she recognized, even at distance, the specific tearing, gasping sound of a man with a chest injury trying to breathe. She heard someone call for a medic and get no answer. She moved faster. The descent took 11 minutes. 11 minutes of bad knee and worse shoulder and frozen rock under her boots and the wind trying to push her off the face of the slope at every exposed section. She did not fall. Falling was not something she allowed herself to do right now, because falling would cost her time she did not have and potentially cost her the function she needed to do what came next. She came off the base of the valley wall into cover behind a cluster of old mining equipment, corroded machinery she could not identify, frozen solid arranged in a rough line that gave her a position from which she could see the Ranger perimeter without yet being visible to either the Rangers or the enemy. She took 30 seconds. She assessed the field. 4 wounded. She had been right from the ridge. 4 men down in positions scattered across the Ranger perimeter, 1 near the main ore building, 2 behind the vehicle cluster, 1 exposed at the eastern edge of the debris field in a position that made her stomach tighten, because he was completely without cover and was going to be visible to the eastern element the moment they reached the gully lip. She started moving before she had finished the full assessment, because the man at the eastern edge was the most immediately at risk, and she was the only one in a position to do anything about it. She moved low and fast along the equipment line, using the machinery as cover, angling toward the exposed Ranger. She was perhaps 40 meters out when she saw his face well enough to identify him. Specialist David Reyes, 23 years old. She had cataloged every man on the team during the initial brief at Fort Richardson with the same thoroughness she applied to her med kit, because knowing your patients before they become casualties is the only way to treat them effectively under fire. Reyes had a wife in San Antonio and a daughter who had just turned 2. He was lying on his side with both hands pressed to his left thigh, and even from 40 meters, she could see the arterial quality of what was soaking through his gloves. She covered the remaining ground in a run that she would not have wanted to explain to a doctor. Reyes heard her coming and raised his sidearm before he saw who she was. The weapon tracked her face for approximately 1 second. Then he lowered it. Then he stared. "Frost?" His voice was a rough whisper. They said you were—" "I know what they said," Emma said. She was already on her knees beside him, her med bag, open hands moving to the wound. "Don't talk. Let me see this." "The avalanche." "Reyes, don't talk." The wound was bad. The round had caught the femoral artery, not a direct hit which would have killed him in under 4 minutes, but close enough that the vessel was partially compromised and bleeding faster than the pressure he was applying could compensate. She had 1 tourniquet out and applied above the wound site before he had finished his next breath, twisted it down with 2 hands, and then held it with her right while her left explored the wound boundaries with fingers that had learned to be fast and precise in exactly these conditions. "That hurts," Reyes said through clenched teeth. "Good," Emma said. "Means you're still with me. Look at me, Reyes. What's your pain level right now, 1 to 10? 8, 8.5. And your daughter's name?" He blinked. "Sophia." "How old is Sophia?" 2. She turned 2 in October." "Good. You're going to tell me all about Sophia's birthday party in a few minutes. Right now, I need you to keep your eyes open and keep talking to me." She applied hemostatic gauze pressure, checked. The tourniquet tension, looked at his face, color responsiveness is tracking, and ran the rapid assessment she had been trained to complete in under 90 seconds and had learned to complete in under 60. He was stable. For now. 15 minutes, maybe 20, before the tourniquet needed to be reassessed and the blood loss recalculated. She looked up. The eastern gully was 20 meters away. She could hear the enemy element on the other side of it. She looked back at Reyes, looked at his weapon. "I need to borrow this," she said, "just for 60 seconds. He handed it to her without argument, because there are moments in a firefight when you recognize competence and respond to it instinctively, and this was one of those moments. She moved to the gully lip in a low crawl. 3 men, moving in single file along the base of the gully, perhaps 10 meters below the top weapons, up moving with the careful deliberateness of fighters who expected resistance. She waited until the lead man was directly below. Then she stood up, put 2 shots into the rock face directly in front of the lead man, not hitting him deliberately, not hitting him because her calculation was not about killing, but about buying time. And in the half second of chaos that followed, she was back down, back behind the gully, lip, back to Reyes before any of the 3 men below had recovered enough to fire accurately. She heard them scrambling back down the gully. She heard shouted voices in a language she identified as Russian accented English, the kind of English spoken by men who learned it in Eastern European military training and have been using it long enough to be functional, but not fluent. She had bought maybe 4 minutes. She used them to get Reyes talking about Sophia's birthday and the cake that had been strawberry flavored because Sophia had decided she loved strawberries the week before the party, and to check his bleeding rate and reposition his tourniquet and start a mental triage map of the other 3 wounded rangers and the fastest route to reach each of them. Then she picked up her kit and moved. The second wounded ranger was behind the vehicle cluster. Sergeant First Class Howard Park, 37, Korea-American, the team's senior communications specialist, who had taken a round through his right chest and was sitting upright against the frozen bumper of an old truck with the particular shallow, careful breathing of a man managing a collapsed lung through sheer force of will. Emma reached him low and fast from the blind side of the vehicle, and he did not have time to be surprised. "Chest wound," she said. It was not a question. "Right side," Park confirmed. His voice was compressed, the words arriving in short sections between the controlled breaths he was parceling out. Didn't want to seal it without knowing the angle. "Good call." She already had the chest seal out. "This is going to feel like pressure. Hold still." She cleaned the entry with what she had applied. The seal checked for exit, found it, applied the second seal, put her ear to his chest, and listened. "Breathe," she said. He breathed. She listened. The collapsed lung was partial. The seal would help restore pressure, might be enough. If not, she had a needle in her kit for tension pneumothorax, but she wanted to give the seal 60 seconds first. 40 seconds later, Park's breathing deepened. She exhaled. He would need definitive care. He would need it soon. But he was stable enough to move under his own power if necessary, and right now, that was what mattered. "How many more?" she said. 2. "Torres is in the main building, head trauma, been unconscious for about 8 minutes. Chen is behind the east pile, GSW abdomen. He was awake last I saw." She looked at Park directly. "Who's the closest officer to Sergeant Cole in this perimeter right now?" Park almost smiled in the thin way of a man who can't afford to waste oxygen on full expressions. "You're going to go tell him I know more into you." "I'm going to go get Chen and Torres first," Emma said. "Then I'm going to go tell him yes." She left Park with his own weapon reloaded in a compressed understanding of what she needed him to watch for and move for the main building. She was 15 meters out when Ryan Cole stepped around the corner of the ore building. He stopped. She stopped. The 2 of them looked at each other across 15 meters of frozen ground, with a firefight still active on 3 sides and the wind beginning to carry the first advanced scouts of the incoming weather system. Light flakes scattered, the kind that are beautiful and also mean. Everything is about to get much worse. Ryan Cole was not a man who lost his words. He had delivered death notifications to families. He had given orders that sent good men into situations some of them hadn't come back from. He had operated in environments that stripped language down to its functional components and discarded everything that wasn't immediately useful. He looked at Emma Frost, alive and moving and already covered in the blood of the man she had been treating, and he lost his words completely. "There are 4 casualties," Emma said. "Reyes is tourniquet-controlled femoral east side of the perimeter. Park has a partial pneumo sealed behind the vehicle cluster. I need Torres and Chen." "Where is Chen?" Ryan pointed. He did it automatically before his brain had caught up. "Behind the east pile," he said. His voice came out strange, lower than usual. Park told me. I wanted confirmation on direction. She moved toward the ore building. When I have all four stable, I need to talk to you about extraction. The weather is moving faster than your timeline. She passed him close enough that he could have put out a hand and stopped her. He did not put out a hand. He turned and watched her go. Briggs appeared at his left elbow like a man materializing from the ground. That's Frost. I know. She's alive. I know, Briggs. We left her. Ryan said nothing. Sarge. Briggs' voice had a quality Ryan had not heard from him in a long time. Not accusation, something quieter and harder to deal with. We left her in the mountain and she walked here and she's treating our people. I can see that. What do we do? Ryan looked at the perimeter, looked at the western high ground position where the suppression team was keeping two enemy fighters pinned but not eliminated. Looked at the gully where the eastern element had pulled back but would not stay back forever. Looked at the sky with its thickening gray and its advanced flakes. We hold this perimeter, he said, and we trust her to do her job. It was the first time he had used the word trust in relation to Emma Frost. It came out of him like something that had needed to be said and had been waiting. Inside the ore building, Emma found Torres. The head trauma was severe. She could see that before she touched him, the specific stillness of unconsciousness. That is not sleep, the uneven pupil response when she checked with his light, the blood from his left ear that indicated basilar skull involvement. She worked fast, establishing airway positioning, checking for cervical injury, monitoring his breathing rate. There was nothing she could do for the underlying injury out here in the field. What she could do was keep him alive long enough to get him somewhere that could. She was checking his pulse for the second time when she heard Webb's voice from the doorway. Frost. Webb was standing there with his rifle in both hands and blood-dried brown on the side of his face, and something in his expression that she hadn't had time to register until this moment. Guilt, she realized. Genuine, unguarded guilt, the kind that doesn't know what to do with itself. I didn't know you were when Cole said to move. Miesharm, Bushas Jimmed. Webb. Emma kept her eyes on Torres. I know you had to move. I don't hold that against you. You should, his voice cracked slightly on the last word. You should hold it against all of us. That's not useful right now. She stood. I need you to stay with Torres. Watch his airway. If his breathing changes rate depth, anything you come get me immediately. Can you do that? Webb straightened. The guilt didn't leave his face, but it organized itself into something functional. Yes. Good. She picked up her kit. Where's the east pile? He pointed. She moved. Chen was awake. This was both good and complicated good, because conscious patients can report symptoms and cooperate with treatment. Complicated, because Chen had been conscious for 23 minutes with an abdominal gunshot wound and had spent that time making the specific calculations that soldiers make about wounds like this, which are not always accurate and are never pleasant. Is it bad? Chen said when Emma reached him. He was 26 from Portland and had the particular directness of someone who has decided that they would rather have the truth than the kindness of uncertainty. It's manageable, Emma said, which was true. The entry was low left quadrant angle, suggesting the round had traveled right and possibly exited without hitting anything immediately catastrophic. She would not know without imaging what had or hadn't been damaged internally. But the bleeding was controllable, his pressure was holding, and his lucidity was a strong indicator that nothing immediately vital had been compromised. Manageable means it could get worse, Chen said. Manageable means you're talking to me and your pressure is adequate and I can control what I can see, Emma said. It means I need you to help me by staying calm and letting me do my job. Can you do that? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice. The choice is just usually between helpful and unhelpful. Chen laughed. It hurt him, and he stopped, but the laugh had been real. Fair enough, he said. Do your job. She did her job. She was applying the final wound seal when Ryan appeared around the ore pile. He crouched on the other side of Chen, not touching anything, just present the way a senior soldier is sometimes present at a casualty site, occupying the space between useful and bearing witness. How is he? Ryan said. Stable. All four are stable. Emma didn't look up from her work. We have a larger problem. The weather. The weather is coming faster than your extraction window accounts for. I've been watching it, Since I came off the South Ridge, the system accelerated by at least 2 hours. You've got 4 hours, maybe 4.5, before this valley is completely socked in. After that, the helicopter can't approach. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Our extraction LZ is north, 40 minutes at mission pace. At mission pace with 4 walking wounded and no casualties. Your current pace with 4 men who cannot walk unassisted is not 40 minutes. No, it's not. She finished the seal, checked Chen's color, packed her kit with the efficiency of someone who has stopped thinking about what she has been through and is only thinking about what comes next. I found a route. Ryan looked at her. What route? There's a descent path from the South Valley Wall, a frozen ice chute that runs down to the flatlands. If you take it, the ice chute, Ryan said this the way a man says something he has already dismissed. Frost, it's steep, yes. It's also protected from the eastern blocking force, completely screened from the western high ground, and it deposits you 2 miles south of the secondary LZ rather than the primary. The secondary LZ is still within helicopter range, with 4 casualties on litters down a vertical ice face. I went up it on foot with a damaged shoulder and a bad knee, Emma said. With ropes and controlled descent hardware from your gear, 4 litter patients are manageable. Ryan stared at her. Chen from the ground said, I'd like to vote for the option that gets me to a hospital. Ryan looked at Chen, looked at Emma, looked at the sky above the valley walls where the gray had deepened another shade in the last 10 minutes. Show me the route, he said. She showed him. She walked him to the South Valley Wall while Briggs maintained the perimeter, and the suppression teams kept the enemy elements from pressing their advantages, and she traced the chute line from bottom to top. The angle, the width, the anchor points she had identified during her descent, the section near the midpoint that would require a belay for the litters. Ryan stood beside her and looked and said nothing for a long time. It's your call, Emma said. I won't pretend otherwise. You're the senior ranger on this mission. You're the one who walked out of an avalanche this morning, Ryan said, and then walked here and treated 4 casualties under fire. He paused. Your judgment on terrain is better than mine. I established that on the ridge and didn't listen. I'm listening now. This was a harder thing for him to say than it appeared. She could hear that in the way the words came out, each one carrying more weight than its syllables should account for. She did not make it easier or harder. She simply accepted it. Then we move in 30 minutes, she said. I need to splint Reyes for transport, check Park Seal, and reassess Torres. You need to organize the litter teams and establish a rear guard that can break contact and follow us down. What about the hostages? Emma stopped. She turned. The hostages are in the complex. Confirm location north building based on what one of their fighters said before he stopped talking. We haven't been able to push to the complex because of the contact situation. Emma looked north, looked at the valley, looked at the clock in her head. 2 of your ambulatory men, she said. Fastest route to the north building. If we have the hostages in 20 minutes, we take them down the chute with us. If we don't have them in 20 minutes, we're not leaving them, Ryan said. I know, which means we get them in 20 minutes. She picked up her kit. I'll go. Frost. You need to organize the litter teams. I'm faster alone in this terrain, and I don't need a spotter for a building assault if I have a surprise. She was already moving. 20 minutes, Sergeant. Have them ready to move. Ryan called after her. You're injured. She did not stop walking. So is everyone. She went north at a pace that ignored the protest from her knee and shoulder, both moving through the mining complex the way her mother had taught her to move through unfamiliar terrain. Not fast as in rushing, but fast as in committed, without the hesitation that costs more time than speed saves. The north building was a loading structure, all partially collapsed on the east side, with the kind of exterior that told you everything was concentrated toward the interior, where the structural members were still sound. She went around the perimeter, once fast reading entry points and threat positions, before she found what she needed, a secondary entrance on the north face off the main sight lines with no defender visible. 2 guards inside. She could hear them voices movement the particular irregular quality of men who have been holding a position for hours and are alert but not acutely keyed to immediate threat. She was through the secondary entrance before either of them had time to understand what was happening. She did not fire. She used the specific close-quarter skills that the instructors at UD/S had first attempted to teach her, and that she had spent the following 3 years refining past what the training program had time for controlling bodies in confined spaces, redirecting momentum, applying pressure to the specific anatomical points that shut a person down without requiring weapons. The first guard went down against the wall in under 4 seconds. The second guard had time to bring his weapon up. Emma was already inside his guard. He went down in 3 seconds. Neither of them would be comfortable for a while. Both of them were breathing. She found the hostages in the back room. Dr. Patricia Holt, James Carmichael, a young translator named Victor Senko, 22 years old from Kiev by way of Anchorage. All 3 were bound. All 3 were hypothermic and frightened and dehydrated. None of them had visible injuries beyond bruising and cold. American military, Emma said and cut the first restraint. We're leaving now. I need all 3 of you to move fast and follow in my direction exactly. Can you do that? Dr. Holt looked at her, this small, bloody, completely controlled young woman in the middle of what had been a nightmare, and said, "Who are you?" Emma Frost. Navy. I'll explain later. She moved to the second restraint. Right now I need you walking. Carmichael was already standing, stamping, feeling back into his feet with the grim determination of a man who has decided that he is going home. I can walk, he said. Victor needs help. Emma looked at Victor. Victor looked at her with enormous eyes and said in careful English, I am able to walk. I am just very cold. Good, Emma said. Cold means you're still with us. Let's go. She brought all 3 of them south at a pace that the hostages found difficult, and that Emma maintained by the simple practice of not giving anyone the option of slowing down. She kept Carmichael and Holt on her flanks, kept Victor in the middle where she could monitor him, and moved them through the complex and down toward the Ranger perimeter with 8 minutes to spare. Ryan saw them coming. She watched his face change when he counted Emma, plus 3 others, plus 2 guards missing, and 3 hostages accounted for, and something happened in his expression that she was not sure she had seen there before. Not admiration exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that involved recalculation. 18 minutes, she said when she reached him. He said nothing for a moment. All three. Dr. Holt has mild hypothermia. All 3 are dehydrated. Victor needs monitored during the descent, otherwise ambulatory. She looked at the litter teams which Briggs had organized with the efficiency of a man who has done this before. Are we ready? We're ready, Briggs said. And then, as if he couldn't help it, Emma looked at him. How what? How are you still standing? She thought about this question for a moment, thought about her mother's voice in the dark of the snow, thought about 10 feet of consolidated debris and 1 working arm, and the specific quiet decision that the mountain does not get to win today. Stubbornness, she said. Briggs made a sound that was almost a laugh. Ryan was watching her. Frost. She met his eyes. I owe you. Later, she said. Not hard, not cold, just clear. We have 4 wounded men and 3 civilians and a weather window that is closing. Let's get everyone home first. She shouldered her kit. She took her position at the head of the column. And for the second time that day, Emma Frost led the way through impossible terrain with the weight of other people's lives on her shoulders and did not look back. The ice chute waited in the south wall of the valley, steep and demanding, and exactly as unforgiving as the mountain always was. She stepped onto it without hesitation. Behind her, 1 by 1, 12 Rangers and 3 hostages followed the woman they had buried alive into the descent. The ice chute was exactly as brutal as it looked. Emma had known it would be. She had come up it 40 minutes earlier on 2 damaged limbs with nobody depending on her survival except herself, and that had been hard enough. Going down it with 4 litter patients, 3 hypothermic civilians, and 12 soldiers who had never set eyes on this terrain before today was a different order of problem entirely. She set the first anchor herself, driving the P-10 into a rock seam with 3 strikes of the tool from her kit, testing it with her full body weight before she trusted it with anything else. Briggs was beside her before she asked, reading the setup without needing an explanation, threading the rope with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done vertical operations in worse conditions than this. Litter 1 goes first, Emma said. Reyes, his tourniquet needs reassessment at the bottom. I've got maybe 20 minutes left on the current setting before I need to release and reapply. So we move him fast. How fast? Briggs asked. Faster than comfortable. Briggs nodded like this was reasonable. It was not reasonable. He did it anyway. Ryan had organized the litter teams without being asked twice about anything, which told him something about him that the events of the morning had temporarily obscured. He was genuinely good at the tactical mechanics of leadership. He had put his two strongest men on each litter, positioned the ambulatory wounded where they could move under their own power but with support on either side, and placed the three hostages in the middle of the column where they were insulated from both the front and rear threat. It was good work. Emma registered this and said nothing about it because acknowledging it would have cost time neither of them had. "Victor," she said, moving to the young translator before the descent began. He was wrapped in a thermal layer that Corporal Webb had stripped off his own pack without being asked. "I need to know if you feel dizzy, confused, or if your fingers stop hurting." Victor blinked. "If they stop hurting is bad. If they stop hurting, it means the cold has progressed further than I want it to. Pain is good right now. Tell me if the pain changes." "I will tell you," Victor said. He had the particular composure of someone very young who has survived something very frightening and is operating on the far side of it with a clarity that sometimes comes after extreme fear, not calm exactly, but focused. "Thank you for coming to get us." "Don't thank me yet," Emma said. "We still have to get down this mountain." She went to the chute lip and checked the first rope line and called the descent. The first litter went down in 7 minutes. Reyes made no sound during the descent, which was either very good or concerning. Emma monitored his color from her anchor position above and kept her count going. When the litter team signaled all clear from below, she exhaled. 7 down, 7 minutes. Good. The second litter park, the chest wound, was more complicated because the angle of the chute put his upper body slightly downhill for the steepest section, which was exactly wrong for his lung, and required 2 of the belay team to manually maintain his head elevation throughout the descent, while the others managed the litter ropes. Emma called the adjustments from above. The team executed them without argument, without hesitation, without the slightest indication that they found it unusual to be taking medical positioning instructions from the Navy medic who had crawled out of an avalanche that morning. 8 minutes. Park reached the bottom, breathing steadily. Emma looked at the sky. The weather was not waiting. The flakes had moved from advanced scouts to something more purposeful. Not a full storm yet, but the leading edge of one, the kind that drops visibility incrementally over 20 minutes before it drops it dramatically all at once. The temperature had fallen another 2 degrees. The wind had found a direction and committed to it. "We have maybe 90 minutes before this chute becomes impassable," she called to Ryan. "Then we move faster," Ryan said. They moved faster. The hostages went next in sequence, each one belayed by a ranger on a separate line, with Emma's voice guiding their body position from above. Dr. Holt descended with the focused determination of a woman who has processed her fear into forward motion. Carmichael went down on his back because his legs were not fully reliable, and prone was more controllable. Victor surprised her. He descended with his eyes open and his jaw set and his hands working the rope with a competence that suggested someone had taught him something about this at some point. When all 3 hostages were down, Emma allowed herself 4 seconds of something that was not quite relief because there were still 2 litters to go. Torres was the problem she had been saving. The head trauma made him the most fragile casualty on the field, more fragile in some ways than Reyes with the arterial wound, because arterial bleeding could be controlled mechanically, while intracranial pressure could not be controlled at all with what she had available. He needed to reach the bottom in a position that minimized any jostling of his cervical spine and any additional insult to the intracranial pressure that she suspected was already elevated. He needed to go slowly. He needed to go carefully. He also needed to go in the next 12 minutes, or the weather was going to make the decision for all of them. She went down with him. She took the anchor position on the lower rope, descending alongside the litter, keeping her hand on his neck brace, monitoring his airway and his breathing rate with the specific divided attention of someone who has learned to track multiple critical variables simultaneously without losing any of them. The litter team above her managed the upper ropes. Briggs called the pace from the anchor point. Torres was still unconscious. His breathing had changed, not dangerously, but she had been listening to it for the last 40 minutes, and she knew its rhythm. The way, the rhythm of something you've been monitoring very carefully, and it had shifted slightly. The rate had decreased. The depth had increased. This could be his brain managing pressure. It could be the beginning of Cushing's response, which was the body's last-ditch attempt to maintain perfusion to a swelling brain, and was also a warning sign of an impending herniation. She needed him at a hospital within 2 hours. She was currently on the side of a mountain in a building snowstorm. She regulated her own breathing, kept her hand on his neck, counted his respirations. They reached the bottom. She stepped off the rope and was immediately beside him, full assessment pupils rate response. Left pupil was 2 millimeters larger than the right. She had 2 hours, maybe less. Chen, she called. Chen, the abdominal wound was the last litter. She looked up at the chute. Ryan was already on the line beside Chen's litter, having taken the second rope without being assigned it, because he had watched Emma descend with Torres, and understood without being told that Chen needed the same things someone at his level during the descent, not just a line from above. It was the right call. He had made it himself. Emma watched him descend alongside Chen's litter, with a steadiness and care that she had not expected from him this morning, and was recalibrating around now. People contain things. She knew this. Her mother had taught her this too, not as a lesson about kindness, but as a lesson about assessment. Never assume the full inventory of what a person is capable of from a single observation. Ryan had been wrong on the ridge. He had been wrong when he walked away. He was not a man without capacity. He was a man who had made the wrong call under impossible circumstances and was now quietly and without announcement trying to make better ones. Chen reached the bottom, intact abdomen, tight but stable. Ryan stepped off the rope and looked at Emma. He looked at the 4 litters arranged on the flat ground below the chute. He looked at the 3 hostages. He looked at his 12 rangers, all of them present, all of them here. Secondary LZ, Emma said. 2 miles south. We move. We move, Ryan confirmed. They had been moving for 6 minutes when the first shots came from the east. Emma had not been surprised. She had run the numbers during the descent, and the numbers had said that the eastern blocking force would eventually identify the movement away from the primary extraction point and attempt to cut them off, and that this was more likely to happen before they reached the secondary LZ than after. She had built this into her assessment. She had not mentioned it to Ryan because there was nothing to be done about the possibility until it became a reality, and the reality required specific response rather than general preparation. The specific response required was immediate. Litters keep moving, Emma said. Her voice carried, without being loud, the particular command voice that cuts through chaos without adding to it. Webb Park needs his litter tilted left. Park, do not sit up. Ryan, she had already turned east. Frost, Ryan said sharply. I see them. Keep the column moving. She was moving away from the column toward the eastern flank, using the terrain the way she had been taught to use it, not running in the open, but angling between the natural features that the frozen ground provided, the ice ridges and debris mounds and old equipment scattered across the flats that gave her microcover to work with. 3 shooters. She had counted 3 distinct weapon signatures in the first burst. They were moving to intercept the column's path of travel, angling northwest to cut off the route to the secondary LZ. She put herself between them and the litters. This was not a tactical calculation. It was simpler than that. The litters couldn't maneuver. The shooters were moving to a position that would give them an unobstructed angle on 4 helpless men. She was the only variable in the equation that could change the geometry. She moved. The first shooter saw her at approximately the same moment she saw him, clearly enough to understand his position relative to the cover he was using. He was behind an ice ridge weapon, up-angle oriented at the column. He had not yet seen her as the primary threat. She was too far right, too low, moving in the blind spot created by his own cover. She kept moving until she was not in the blind spot anymore. He adjusted. She was faster. The exchange happened in under 6 seconds at close range, with Emma using her sidearm from a supported position against a shooter with a longer weapon who had the disadvantage of being surprised that she was there at all. She did not kill him. She did not have to. She put a round into the ice ridge immediately in front of his face, and the ice fragmented in ways that were extremely unpleasant, and he went down and stayed down. The second shooter had her position now. She moved before he fired. The round hit empty ground 3 feet behind her. She was already 20 feet left behind an equipment mound, breathing controlled, calculating his angle. He was good, better than the first. He adjusted faster, and his second round was close enough that she heard it pass, which is a specific sound that you only learn to recognize the hard way and that you never forget once you've learned it. She went flat, changed direction, came up behind him from the south. He heard her at the last second and started to turn. She was already there. 2 seconds. He went down. Breathing. She moved. The third shooter had stopped advancing. She could hear him movement to the north, pulling back the specific sound of someone who has watched 2 colleagues disappear in rapid succession and is making a survival decision. She let him go. She turned back to the column. Ryan was watching her from the column's flank. Webb was watching. Briggs was watching. Dr. Holt was watching, pressed close to Victor with Carmichael's arm around her shoulders, and on her face was an expression that Emma had no time to interpret, but that looked very much like someone revising their understanding of what a person could be. 2 down, 1 withdrew, Emma said, rejoining the column at a pace that didn't invite discussion of what had just happened. We have a clear corridor for approximately 8 minutes before any reorganization on their part. That's our window. 8 minutes to 2 miles, Briggs said. 8 minutes to get enough distance that they can't reestablish effective angles. The last half mile will be out of their reach regardless. She checked her watch. She checked the scale. Reyes needs tourniquet reassessment now while we're moving. Someone hold this litter steady. Webb moved to the litter without being asked. Emma reassessed the tourniquet while walking, released, repacked, reapplied, checked Reyes' color, checked his pulse rate at his wrist. Reyes, she said, talk to me. Still here, Reyes said. His voice was thinner than it had been at the gully. He had lost more blood than she wanted, and his pressure was lower than she wanted, but he was conscious, and that was what mattered. Sophia's going to be very upset with me for missing her bath time. Tell her it's on me, Emma said. I'll take the blame. He almost laughed. The almost was good enough. She looked at Torres on the adjacent litter. Still unconscious. Breathing rate holding. She had been watching his pupils every 4 minutes since the bottom of the chute, and the differential was stable, which was the one encouraging sign she had. 2 hours, maybe less. Faster, she said. They went faster. The column had been moving for 22 minutes when Ryan pulled up beside her. He matched her pace, which was not slow, and said nothing for nearly 40 seconds. She knew he was working up to something. She had already decided she was not going to help him. I need to say something, he said finally. You need to keep your eyes on the northern approach, Emma said. We still have potential contact from the flanks. Briggs has the northern approach. He was quiet for another moment. I left you in the mountain. I know. I told them you were dead. I told them to move. His voice had the flat, stripped quality of a man forcing himself to say something exactly as it is without softening. I made that call in under 5 seconds, and I walked away, and I didn't look back. Emma said nothing. I've been making calls like that for 20 years, Ryan continued, calculating assets, calculating timelines, deciding what the mission can carry and what it can't. And I've been right. Mostly, I've been right enough times that I stopped. He paused. I stopped auditing my assumptions. She listened. I assumed you were liability before you said a single word, he said. I assumed it because of what you looked like and how old you were and what I decided headquarters was thinking when they assigned you. I didn't ask. I didn't look at your record. I just decided. Emma looked at the terrain ahead, looked at her column, looked at Torres on his litter. I grew up on these mountains, she said finally. My mother made me study every ridge system in the northern range before I was 17. I've done cold weather SERE 3 times. I qualified expert in 4 weapons systems. My sniper scores at Buddy S broke a record that had stood since 2007. She paused. None of that was in the brief you were given. I didn't ask for it. No, you didn't. She kept walking. I'm not telling you that to make you feel worse. I'm telling you because the problem isn't what you assume. The problem is that you never built in a mechanism to check your assumptions. Rank doesn't make you right. Experience doesn't make you right. They make you confident, which is useful, but confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. Ryan was quiet for a long time. How do you not be angry at me right now? He said. She thought about this honestly. I am a little, she said, but anger costs energy, and energy is a resource I'm currently allocating elsewhere. She glanced at him. Ask me again when we're home. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, too much weight behind it for that. More like the beginning of respect that knew it had a lot of ground to make up. When we're home, he said. The secondary LZ was a frozen lake bed 200 meters wide, flat and clear, and exactly where the mission planners had identified it as a viable alternate extraction point. Emma had confirmed its coordinates against her memory of the terrain map during the descent and had been running the calculation of approach angle versus weather obstruction for the last 30 minutes. The helicopter could make it, barely. The window was closing, but it had not closed. She pulled out the emergency beacon from her kit, a personal locator device she had packed against the specific possibility that the primary radio would be unavailable, and activated it the moment they cleared the tree line onto the lake surface. 40 seconds later, the beacon confirmed acquisition. Briggs was watching her. "You had that the whole time." "I always carry a backup," Emma said. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in the particular way of someone who was rearranging a large number of previously formed conclusions simultaneously. They set the 4 litters on the lake surface and established a perimeter while they waited. Emma moved between the casualties. Reyes parked Torres Chen, checking each one in sequence, making adjustments, noting changes, calculating what each of them needed in what order the moment they were aboard the aircraft. Torres was her primary concern. The pupil differential had increased by 0.5 millimeter in the last assessment. His breathing was still the modified pattern she had been monitoring. She was now certain about the intracranial pressure elevation and certain about the 2-hour window, and she was watching the sky for the helicopter with a focused attention that she was not going to describe to Ryan because there was nothing he could do about it. And information without available response is not useful. It is simply suffering. Webb sat down beside Torres' litter. He looked at the unconscious ranger's face for a long time. "Torres and I went through selection together," Webb said. He wasn't talking to anyone specifically, just talking in the way people sometimes talk when the action has paused and the reality of what almost happened begins to arrive. "He was faster than me on the runs. Used to make me crazy. I'm taller by 5 inches, and he just motor past me on the mountain phase, like the altitude didn't bother him at all." Emma looked at Torres, at the faint movement of his chest. "He's going to motor past you again," she said. "Give him time." Webb looked at her. "You really believe that?" She held his gaze. "I believe that I have kept him stable for 4 hours in conditions that would have killed him without intervention, and that the hospital is 40 minutes away, and that he is a young man with a strong cardiovascular system and a brain that has been managing this injury very effectively. Yes, I believe it." Webb nodded slowly. He looked back at Torres. "Okay," he said. "Okay." It was perhaps the most important thing Emma did that day. Not the avalanche, not the gunfight, not the hostage rescue, or the chute descent, or the flanking action. The most important thing was sitting beside a terrified young soldier and saying, "I believe it," with enough conviction that he could borrow the belief until he had his own. She was still beside Torres when Ryan appeared and crouched at the other end of the litter. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "The investigation board is going to want to know about the ridge." "I know. I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, exactly what I decided and why." Emma looked at him. "Ryan?" She used his first name for the first time. It came out without calculation. "I know you will. I'm not worried about the investigation board." "You should be. What happened up there?" "What happened up there was that you made a tactical call under time pressure with incomplete information, and it turned out to be wrong. It happens." She looked at the sky. "What happens after is the part that defines the person." He sat with this for a moment. "I've been in this uniform for 20 years, he said, "and I'm not sure I've ever had a day that changed as many things as today changed. Most days don't." "No," he was quiet. "Most days don't." The radio on Briggs's kit crackled. Then a voice the helicopter crew 40 seconds out confirming the beacon acquisition and the approach angle. Emma was on her feet before the transmission finished, moving to Torres, repositioning his head stabilization, checking Park's chest seal one final time, calling to the litter teams. When it lands, Torres goes first, then Reyes. Park and Chen can board under their own power with assistance. Hostages board after the casualties in the order I call. Everyone else when I say. Nobody argued, nobody questioned. 12 Rangers and 3 hostages arranged themselves exactly as she directed. She heard the rotors before she saw the Black Hawk. Then she saw it coming in low from the south, navigating below the cloud ceiling, with the careful deliberateness of a pilot who is right at the edge of what conditions allow and knows it. The wash hit them hard as it settled. The snow on the lake surface rose in a blinding white cloud and then fell back. The door was already open. The flight medic was already leaning out. Casualties first, Emma called. Torres went up. Reyes went up. She was at both litters talking the flight medic through the status of each patient in rapid, precise clinical language findings. Intervention's current status, timeline priority, order for definitive care. The flight medic was good. She could tell he was good by the questions he asked and the way he processed the answers. Park moved under his own power with Webb's arm under his. Chen walked slowly and carefully and made it. The hostages, Victor first because his hypothermia was the most progressed, then Holt, then Carmichael, who paused at the door of the helicopter and turned back looking at Emma with an expression she would not have known what to do with if she had been watching it. You came for us, Carmichael said. That was the mission, Emma said. Get in the aircraft, Mr. Carmichael. He got in. Ryan was the last ranger to board. He stepped to the door and then stopped and turned back. And Emma understood that he was going to say something and that she needed to not let him say it right now. Because if he said it right now, she was going to have to respond to it, and she was running on the last functional reserves of what she had, and she needed those reserves to get to the helicopter. After action brief, she said, when we land. He held her gaze for 1 second. After action brief, he said. He stepped back and she climbed in. The moment she was aboard, something left her body. Not strength exactly, more the specific sustained tension that had been holding everything in operational alignment since she had first heard the crack in the cornice that morning. It released all at once quietly like a rope going slack. Her left shoulder became suddenly and comprehensively terrible. Her knee locked in a way that told her she had been compensating for something structural, and the compensation was done now. She sat against the rear bulkhead with her med kit across her lap, and her eyes still moving between her 4 casualties, still counting, still monitoring, because the job was not done until the job was done. Reyes had his eyes open. He caught her looking. Hey, Frost, he said. Hey, Reyes. Sophia's birthday party, he said. I was going to tell you about it. Emma looked at him, at the color returning slowly to his face, at the fact that he was here on this aircraft talking alive. Tell me, she said. He told her. She listened to every word. Around them, the Black Hawk lifted off the frozen lake and banked south toward the city and the hospital, and everything that came next, climbing away from the Brooks Range with its 12 rangers and 3 hostages, and 1 woman who had refused with a completeness that the mountain had not been able to argue with to be left behind. Below, the valley disappeared into white. The storm closed over it like a hand closing over something it expected to find and found empty. The Black Hawk landed at Regional Medical Center Anchorage at 14 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. Emma knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock on the aircraft's instrument panel for the last 22 minutes, running Torres' timeline against the flight duration with the specific dread of someone who knows the numbers and cannot change them. 1 hour and 58 minutes since she had first noted the pupil differential at the bottom of the ice chute. The window she had given him was 2 hours. They had made it with 120 seconds to spare. She was out of the aircraft before the rotors stopped, and she was talking before the trauma team reached the door. Traumatic brain injury estimated 4+ hours, post-insult basilar skull involvement. Progressive pupillary asymmetry left greater than right by approximately 1 millimeter. At last assessment 20 minutes ago, Cushing's pattern breathing resolved during flight GCS on scene was 3 has not regained consciousness. She was walking beside the litter, keeping pace with the trauma team, not slowing. He needs CT and neurosurgery consult immediately. I mean, immediately. The trauma physician, a woman in her 40s named Dr. Vasquez, who had the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have run trauma bays for a long time, looked at Emma as she processed the information. You're the field medic. Navy, Petty Officer First Class Frost. Vasquez looked at Torres, looked at Emma's face, made a calculation of her own. Or 2 is open. We'll go straight to imaging. She looked at her team. Move. They moved. Emma stopped at the trauma bay door because Torres was through it, and the team was through it, and the door swung shut, and her part of that particular task was done. She stood outside the door for 3 seconds, which was all she allowed herself, and then she turned and went back to the landing pad because Reyes was being offloaded, and Park was being walked in, and Chen needed someone to check the wound seal before internal medicine got their hands on him and made assumptions. She worked through the next 40 minutes with the focused efficiency of someone who has not yet given herself permission to stop. She briefed the attending on each of her 4 casualties in sequence. She reviewed the tourniquet documentation she had maintained on Reyes during the field phase and handed it to the vascular surgery resident with a clarity and completeness that made the resident look at her twice. She made sure Park's imaging orders included the right chest with specific attention to the lung apex because the seal had been holding, but she wanted confirmation. She checked Chen's vital signs herself against the numbers from the field and noted the changes to the attending with the dates and times of each observation. When she was satisfied that every one of her 4 patients had been received documented and assigned to appropriate care, she walked to the nearest wall in the emergency department corridor, put her back against it, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She did not sleep. She was not capable of sleep yet, but she allowed herself something that was adjacent to it, a suspension of forward motion, a temporary cessation of the constant calculation that had been running since the moment she heard the cornice crack that morning. She closed her eyes. She breathed. Her shoulder was on fire. Her knee had stiffened to the point where standing had become a negotiation. She had a bruise along her left rib cage from the avalanche impact that she had not had time to assess and was now asserting itself with considerable authority. She had been awake for 19 hours, buried alive, braided in combat, descended a mountain, and been in 2 separate firefights. And the sum of all of that was arriving now in the way that physical reality always arrives once the adrenaline steps back all at once without apology. She sat on that floor for 7 minutes. Then Webb appeared at the end of the corridor. He walked toward her with the particular gait of someone who is not sure whether they are welcome, but is coming anyway, which she appreciated more than a confident approach would have felt. He stopped 2 feet away and looked down at her sitting on the floor, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. "Torres is in surgery," he said. "I know, I talked to Vasquez before she went in. She said if he got there 20 minutes later." "I know, Webb." He sat down on the floor beside her. 2 soldiers on a hospital corridor floor, both of them damaged, both of them present, which was the only thing that mattered. "My sister called 3 times during the flight," Webb said. "I couldn't pick up, obviously, but she called 3 times. Call her back." "I will." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about the ridge. When Cole said move, I looked at the debris field for maybe 10 seconds, and then I moved. I just moved." "You made the call your commanding officer made," Emma said. "That's not an excuse." "I know it's not. I'm not offering it as one." She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. "You were 19 years old following an order in a combat situation. What you do now, how you carry this, what you learn from it, what kind of soldier you decide to be going forward, that's the part you control." Webb was quiet for a long time. "How do you do that?" he said finally. "How do you just process it and file it and keep moving?" Emma thought about her mother, thought about the specific lessons that had not been about snow or mountains or weapons at all. "My mother used to say that the mountains don't care about your feelings, emotions." She meant it practically that emotion in a dangerous environment is a resource to be managed, not suppressed, because suppression fails and management doesn't. She paused. But she also meant that the feeling doesn't go away. It waits. And when you're in a safe place, you let it come. Webb looked at her. "Are we in a safe place now?" "Safe enough," Emma said. Webb put his face in his hands. He didn't make a sound. She didn't ask him to. She simply stayed beside him on that corridor floor and let the silence hold what words couldn't. Ryan Cole found them there 6 minutes later. He stopped at the end of the corridor, looked at Emma on the floor, looked at Webb, made the assessment of a man who understood what he was seeing and knew he was the cause of most of it. He walked to them slowly. He did not sit down. He stood and he looked at Emma with an expression that had been stripped of every layer of professional composure and was just a face now, just a person carrying the full weight of the day. "Reyes is in surgery," he said. "They said he's going to be fine. The vascular team said the tourniquet application was textbook." He stopped, started again. "They said if the tourniquet hadn't been applied exactly right at the angle it was, he would have bled out before he reached the aircraft." Emma said nothing. "Park's lung is reinflating," Ryan continued. "Chen is in imaging. Torres..." He stopped for a second. "The neurosurgeon says you bought him exactly the time he needed." She said she's operated on TBI cases that came in faster from urban settings and didn't arrive in the condition he arrived in. She wants to know what your field protocol was. I'll talk to her, Emma said. Ryan crouched down to her level, put himself at eye contact without forcing it. I need to say something to you, not as a debrief, not for the record, just person to person. Emma waited. I left you in that mountain because I decided you were expendable, Ryan said. I had decided you were expendable before the mission started, before I knew anything real about you, based on nothing except what you looked like and what I assumed headquarters was thinking. And when the mountain gave me a reason to make that decision official, I made it in 5 seconds and I walked away. His voice was level. She could hear what the levelness was costing him. There is no version of that where I wasn't wrong, not tactically, not as a leader, not as a human being. The corridor was quiet. Webb had looked up from his hands and was listening. Emma looked at Ryan Cole for a long moment. She looked at the face of a man who had spent 20 years being right and was now very deliberately and without any mechanism for making it easier being wrong in front of another person. I heard you, she said. When I was under the snow, I heard you say she's gone. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. I want you to know that, Emma continued, not because I want you to feel it worse than you already do, but because I think you should know what it sounds like from the other side of a decision like that. What those 3 words sound like when you're the one they're about. She held his gaze. It sounded like arithmetic, like I was a number being subtracted. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing to say. He knew she was right, and saying he knew she was right would have been insufficient. I don't need an apology, Emma said. I need you to use it. Everything that happened today, use it to be a better commander to the next person who gets assigned to your team and doesn't look the way you expected them to look. She paused. That's all I'm asking. Ryan looked at her for a long, steady moment. Okay, he said. One word, meaning everything. Webb exhaled beside her long and slow like something had been released. Emma pushed herself up from the floor using the wall for support because her knee was not going to cooperate with the unassisted version. Ryan stood and automatically reached out a steadying hand and then stopped himself, uncertain, and she took it anyway because she needed it, and refusing it would have been performance rather than honesty. She stood, let go, adjusted her weight. I need to get my shoulder looked at, she said, and my knee, and probably my ribs. She looked at Ryan. The after-action brief, when does the board convene? Tomorrow morning, Fort Richardson, 0800. I'll be there. You should be in a hospital bed. I'll be at the board, she said, and then I'll be in a hospital bed. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she recognized from the aircraft, that same quality of recalibration of someone continuously encountering a person and having to revise their understanding of what that person contained. I'll walk you to the ER intake, he said. You don't have to, I know I don't have to, Ryan said. I want to. She let him walk her. They went down the corridor side by side in silence that was not the silence of strangers or the silence of enemies, but the silence of 2 people who have been through something that very few shared contexts can produce and who are not yet sure what to call, what exists between them, and who are all right with that uncertainty for now. At the intake desk, he stopped. She stopped. Frost. He used her name the way he had learned to use it today, not as rank, not as designation, but as a person's name. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, for coming back, for all of it, he stopped. Tried again, for being better than I deserve today. Emma looked at him steadily. I didn't come back for you, she said. Not harshly, just truthfully the way she did most things. I came back because there were wounded men and 3 hostages in a mission that hadn't been completed. I came back because that's who I am. She held his gaze for one more moment. But I'm glad you're going to be different because of it, she said. That part matters. She turned to the intake desk. Behind her, Ryan Cole stood still for a long moment, and then he walked back down the corridor, and he carried what she had said with him, the way you carry something that has been given to you with the expectation that you will not put it down. The emergency physician who examined Emma 40 minutes later was a young resident named Dr. Park, no relation, who looked at her list of injuries, then at her face, then back at the list, and said, Can I ask what happened? Training exercise, Emma said. Dr. Park looked at her. Ma'am, The official report will be available through Alaska Command by end of week, Emma said pleasantly. Right now, I need you to tell me about my shoulder. The shoulder was dislocated. Had been, he suspected, since the avalanche, which meant she had operated for approximately 7 hours on a dislocated shoulder and had simply compensated. He had been a physician for 3 years, and he said this to her with the specific tone of someone who cannot decide whether they are impressed or appalled. Both, Emma suggested. Both. Dr. Park agreed. I'm going to need to reduce this. It's going to be extremely unpleasant. I've had worse days, Emma said. He reduced it. It was extremely unpleasant. She made one sound controlled and brief and then was silent through the rest of the procedure with the focused stillness of someone who has decided that pain is information rather than experience. The knee was a partial MCL tear, manageable, weeks of recovery, but no surgery required. The ribs were 2 fractures, hairline both on the left side, consistent with a high-velocity impact from the left. He wrapped them. He told her she needed to be admitted. Tomorrow, Emma said. Tonight, Dr. Park said. I have an after-action board at 0800. Ms. Frost. Petty Officer Frost, she said, not correcting him unkindly, just clearly. And I will be admitted tonight and discharged in time for the board. I will sign whatever waiver you need. I will comply with every monitoring requirement you specify, but I will be at that board. Dr. Park looked at her for a long moment. I'm putting it in the chart that I recommended against this, he said. That's exactly what you should do, Emma agreed. He admitted her. She was in a hospital bed by 9 o'clock that evening. Her shoulder was in a sling, her knee was wrapped, her ribs were taped. She had been given pain medication that she had accepted at half the recommended dose because full dose made her thinking slow, and her thinking was not something she was willing to slow even tonight. She did not sleep for the first 2 hours. She lay in the bed and she let things arrive. The things she had been managing and filing and setting aside since 6 o'clock that morning, all of it, the sound of the cornice giving way. The impact, the dark, the specific quality of Ryan's voice saying she's gone as it had filtered down through 10 feet of compacted snow and found her in that small cold pocket of borrowed air. The weight of the first ranger she had treated, the specific, desperate quality of Rhea's pulse under her fingers. Torres's eye, the pupil that was wrong. Webb's face when the morphine of adrenaline wore off and the reality of the quarter floor arrived. She let it all come. Her mother had taught her this too. You carry it. Maggie Frost had said, sitting across from her daughter at a kitchen table in Fairbanks one winter evening, after a training exercise that had gone badly, you carry it and you look at it directly and you don't turn away from it and then you decide what you're going to do with it. Because the only people who don't carry anything are the people who haven't done anything worth remembering. Emma looked at it directly. She thought about the avalanche and she thought about what it had felt like to hear 11 sets of boots walking away from her, and she thought about the decision she had made at the surface, not toward extraction, toward duty, and she examined that decision honestly in the way she examined all her decisions. Was it the right call? Was it ego? Was it something else? No. It had been real. The hostages had been real, and the rangers had been real, and the wounded had been real, and the math had been simple. She had skills they needed. She was the only one in a position to provide them, and so she had walked north. There had been no drama in it, no performance, just the calculation and the decision and the movement. She was all right with who she had been today. That was enough. At 11:47, her phone lit up. Unknown number, Alaska area code. She answered. Emma, her mother's voice. Maggie Frost had a voice like the mountains themselves, not loud, but carrying with a depth behind it that suggested everything above the surface was just a fraction of what was there. Emma closed her eyes. Mom, I heard there was an avalanche on Devil's Spine. Joint mission. 1 casualty initially reported. A pause. I've been waiting for 6 hours to find out if that was you. It was me, Emma said. I'm all right. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. For Maggie Frost, 3 seconds of silence was the equivalent of another person's complete emotional breakdown. Emma understood this and gave it the space it needed. Tell me, Maggie said. Emma told her. Not everything, not the classified operational details, not the specifics of the firefight or the hostage location, but the shape of it, the cornice, the warning, the decision she had been overruled on, The burial, the dig, the choice at the surface. Maggie listened without interrupting. Emma had never known anyone who could listen the way her mother listened, completely without preparing a response, without the low-level distraction of someone waiting for their turn. When Emma finished, the silence lasted another 2 seconds. "The shoulder-width air pocket," Maggie said. "You remembered." "I remembered everything you taught me," Emma said. "You moved left in the first 60 seconds." "I did." Another pause. "Good," Maggie said. "Simple. Final. The word carrying every version of 'I am proud of you' and 'I love you,' and I was terrified. And I am so glad you are alive," that her mother would never say directly, because direct emotional statement was not the language Maggie Frost operated in, and Emma had known this her entire life and had never needed it to be otherwise. "The cornice," Emma said. "You would have seen it too." "I would have seen it," Maggie agreed. "Some people learn to read mountains and some people don't, and it has very little to do with rank." Emma almost smiled. "I know. The commander who overruled you." "He's learning," Emma said. "He's genuinely learning. That's not nothing." Maggie considered this. "No," she said finally. "That's not nothing." They talked for 20 more minutes, not about the mission, but about other things, the condition of the range. This winter, a training group Maggie had been running through February, the horse that had developed a limp in November and was only now walking correctly again. The normal things that existed underneath everything else and kept existing regardless of what happened above them. When they said goodnight, Emma set the phone on the bedside table and looked at the ceiling and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since 6 that morning. She slept. She was at Fort Richardson at 0750 the following morning. The board convened in a briefing room on the 3rd floor of the operations building, with 6 officers seated behind a long table and a court reporter in the corner and a water pitcher that nobody touched. Emma entered in her dress uniform, her left arm in a sling, and took her seat across from the panel with the same quiet composure she had brought to every other room she had walked into on this mission. Ryan was already there. He was seated to her left, also in dress uniform, and he looked like a man who had not slept and who had spent the hours he might have slept in the productive, if uncomfortable, activity of honest self-examination. He looked at her when she entered. She gave him a short nod. He returned it. Briggs was there. Webb was there in the back row, not as a principal, but as a witness, with his hands folded and his face carefully neutral, in the way of someone who has been coached on board behavior and is taking the coaching seriously. The senior officer on the panel was a colonel named Whitfield, who had the silver hair and measured cadence of a man who had sat on many boards and understood that the purpose of a board was not to punish, but to understand, and that understanding required patience and precision in equal measure. "Petty Officer Frost," Whitfield said, "I'd like to start with your account of the events on Devil's Spine Ridge, in your own words." Emma told it. She told it in the same way she had told her mother, in the shape of what happened, sequentially, without editorializing, without softening or sharpening any edge. She described the cornice, her assessment, the warning, the response she received, and the avalanche. She described the burial and the escape. She described her decision to move north. She did not describe it as heroism. She described it as a calculation and a result. Whitfield listened. The other panel members, the court reporter's fingers moved. "You described the cornice as unstable prior to the crossing," Whitfield said. "What specifically indicated instability?" Emma explained. "Settlement fractures, wind shift, hollow-sounding snowpack, cornice angle." She spoke in the technical language of someone who has studied the subject and applied it practically, and the specificity of what she said landed in the room with a weight that pure narrative would not have had. Whitfield looked at Ryan. "Staff Sergeant Cole, do you concur with Petty Officer Frost's assessment of the warning she provided?" Ryan said, "Yes, sir. She provided a clear and specific warning. I overruled it. My assessment was incorrect. No qualification, no context provided to soften the admission, just the acknowledgement, clean and direct, the way Emma had given her account." Whitfield studied Ryan for a moment, and the decision to leave the burial site without recovery attempt or extended search. Ryan's jaw tightened by a fraction. "I made the decision that Petty Officer Frost was non-survivable, and that the mission timeline and team safety required immediate movement. I made that decision in under 5 seconds. He paused. "It was the wrong decision. Not because it deviated from established protocol. The protocol in mass casualty situations with mission-critical timelines does not mandate extended search under those conditions. It was wrong because my initial assessment of Petty Officer Frost's capabilities was wrong, and that assessment informed every decision I made about her from the mission brief forward. The room was very quiet. "I am submitting a formal statement," Ryan continued, taking full command responsibility for both decisions, the ridge crossing and the abandonment of the burial site, and a separate formal commendation for Petty Officer Frost's actions over the full duration of the mission. I want that commendation in her permanent record before this board concludes. Whitfield looked at Emma. "Petty Officer Frost, is there anything you would like to add to Staff Sergeant Cole's statement?" Emma considered the question honestly. "Only this," she said. "Staff Sergeant Cole made two decisions under extreme time pressure and combat conditions that turned out to be wrong. He has acknowledged both of them without reservation. He also made a number of decisions after the initial errors under the same conditions with the same pressure that were correct and that contributed directly to the mission's successful outcome." She paused. "I think the record should reflect both." Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the panel. Something passed between them that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. "Noted," he said. The board ran for another 2 hours. Technical reconstruction of the firefight, the ice chute descent, the hostage recovery, which produced its own extended discussion about operational boundaries and solo action, and what the mission profile had and had not authorized. Emma answered every question with the same precision and without any indication that she found any of it adversarial, because she didn't. The board was not her enemy. The board was a mechanism for institutional learning, and institutional learning was the only way any of this was worth anything beyond the individuals who had survived it. When it concluded, Whitfield asked everyone except Emma and Ryan to leave the room. Emma stayed in her seat. Ryan stayed in his. Whitfield looked at both of them for a moment with the expression of someone choosing words with care. "Off the record," he said, "I want to say something." Neither of them indicated objection. "In 28 years, Whitfield said, I have sat on a great many boards that reviewed a great many missions. I have seen every variety of outcome, the brilliant and the catastrophic and everything between." He paused. What happened on this mission was both. It was a catastrophic failure of initial judgment and a remarkable subsequent recovery. And the reason the recovery was remarkable was sitting in this room and sat in this room for 2 hours without once using what she did to diminish what was done to her. He looked at Emma directly. "That is a level of professional integrity that I have encountered perhaps 4 times in my career. I wanted you to know that I saw it." Emma looked at him steadily. "Thank you, sir." Whitfield stood. "The formal commendation will be in your record by end of day." He looked at Ryan. "Staff Sergeant Cole, your statement of command responsibility has been accepted. What happens with it is above my pay grade. But I will tell you that the way you handle this board tells its own story." Ryan stood. "Sir." Whitfield left. The room was empty except for the two of them in the late morning light coming through the windows and the water pitcher nobody had touched. Ryan looked at the table for a moment, then at Emma. "He's right," Ryan said, "about what you did in there." "I told the truth," Emma said. "That's all. You told the truth in a way that—" He stopped. Tried again. "You could have leveled me in there. Everything you said about the cornice, the timeline, the burial, you gave it all straight, and you let the facts do what they did without pushing them. Most people would have pushed. Pushing wouldn't have helped anything," Emma said, "and it wouldn't have been accurate. You made wrong calls and you made right calls. That's the full picture." She stood carefully favoring her good leg. "The full picture is all I'm interested in." Ryan stood as well. He looked at her across the table. "Where do you go from here?" he said. "Hospital," Emma said. "I was supposed to go last night." He almost smiled. "After that, but..." She considered the question honestly. "Back to active duty when I'm cleared, same as always." "The SEAL team?" "If that's where they need me." She picked up her cover from the table. "I don't have strong opinions about where, but I have strong opinions about doing it well wherever it is." Ryan nodded slowly. The expression on his face was one she had seen develop over the course of the last 24 hours, not the recalibration of the aircraft, or the guilt of the corridor, or the directness of the boardroom. Something newer than all of those. Something that was simply respect uncomplicated, arrived at through the hardest possible route, and therefore likely to be permanent. Frost, he said. She looked at him. I'm going to be better, he said. I need you to know that. She studied him for a moment. She believed him. Not because he said it, and not because she wanted to believe it, but because she had watched him over the last 24 hours make one correct decision after another in the exact moments when correct decisions required him to override his own instincts. And that was the hardest kind of correct decision to make, and the kind most likely to indicate something real. I know, she said. She put on her cover and walked to the door. At the doorway, without turning back, she said, "Take care of Webb. He's going to need a commander who pays attention to what he's carrying." A pause behind her. Understood, Ryan said. She walked out into the hallway. She walked the length of the operations building and out the front door into the cold Alaskan morning. The sky had cleared overnight. The Brooks Range was visible to the north, white and enormous, and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened on its slopes the day before. Emma looked at the mountains for a long moment. Then she walked to her vehicle and drove to the hospital where Dr. Park was waiting, with the expression of a man who was genuinely relieved and also ready to have a firm conversation about discharge planning. She let him have the conversation. She had earned the rest. Part 5 lưu ý Việt đủ 5.000 đến 5.700 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách. Kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 5 đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lan man. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng. Cho mình em. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn, không nhảy sang mực document mới. 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đặt 10 đến 15 mini climax, mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn tăng tính tự nhiên, cho có phản ứng của các nhân vật thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh viết văn bản phù hợp với TDS và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more. 3 weeks after the board adjourned, Torres opened his eyes. Emma was not in the room when it happened. She was 2 floors down, finishing the last of her own physical therapy sessions, working her shoulder through a resistance band exercise with the careful patience of someone rebuilding something that had been pushed past its limits and was now insisting slowly on being trusted again. Her phone buzzed against the mat beside her. Webb's name on the screen. She answered before the second ring finished. "He's awake," Webb said. His voice was doing something complicated, caught somewhere between laughter and something that wasn't quite crying, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Frost, he's awake. He asked for water. He recognized me. He recognized me." Emma sat down on the edge of the therapy table. She closed her eyes for 1 second and let it land the full weight of the 2-hour window, the pupil that had been wrong, the calculation she had made on a frozen lake bed about a young man's chances and had refused to let herself say out loud because saying it out loud might have made it smaller than it needed to be. "Tell him," Emma said, "that I expect a full report on whether he was actually faster than you on the mountain phase." Webb laughed. It was real this time, unguarded. "I'll tell him. How's his speech? His motor function?" "Speech is slow but clear. They're saying early days, but the neurosurgeon used the word remarkable about 4 times in the same sentence." Webb paused. She also said something about a field medic who bought him exactly the time his brain needed and not 1 minute less. I think she wanted me to pass that along. Emma looked at the resistance band still looped around her wrist. "Tell Torres I'll come by this week. He'd like that. He's already trying to remember if he actually beat me on the runs, or if I've been making that up for 10 years to feel better about myself." "I have no comment on that," Emma said, "but my money's on Torres." She hung up the phone and sat there for a moment alone in the therapy room, feeling something she had not let herself feel fully until this exact second. Not relief exactly, because relief implies the danger is past, and she had known intellectually for 3 weeks that Torres was stable, improving, expected to recover most of his function with time. This was something underneath relief, something closer to the quiet, complete satisfaction of watching a calculation resolve correctly after holding the uncertainty of it for far too long. She finished her session. She drove home. And 4 days later, true to her word, she walked into Torres's hospital room with a small bag of the specific brand of beef jerky he had mentioned liking during one of his more lucid moments, and watched a young ranger who had been unconscious on a frozen lake bed 3 weeks earlier sit up in his bed and grin at her like she had personally hung the sun. "You're the medic," Torres said. His speech was deliberate, carefully each word placed with effort, but landing exactly where he intended should it. "Webb told me, said you carried me down a mountain." "I had help," Emma said, sitting in the chair beside his bed, "and you were on a litter. Technically, other people were doing most of the carrying." "Webb says you fought off 3 guys with a pistol on the way down." "Webb exaggerates." "Webb says you dug yourself out of an avalanche with one arm." Emma considered this. "That part's accurate." Torres studied her for a long moment with the particular intensity of someone whose brain has recently relearned how to focus and is treating the privilege seriously. "Why peak?" he said finally. "Why come back for us after what they did to you?" Emma thought about the question the way she thought about every question worth answering honestly. "Because you needed a medic," she said, "and I am one needed." It was in its way the simplest and most complete answer she had given anyone about that entire mission, and Torres seemed to understand that there was nothing else underneath it worth excavating. The formal after-action investigation closed officially 11 days after the board convened, and the findings landed at Alaska Command with the kind of institutional weight that tends to ripple outward in ways the people at the center of the events rarely get to witness directly. Medical officers confirmed in writing that all 4 wounded Rangers had survived specifically and directly because of field interventions performed by Petty Officer First Class Emma Frost under sustained hostile fire and in violation of no protocol, but well beyond what the mission's medical support tasking had anticipated. The vascular surgery team's report on Reyes singled out the tourniquet application and reassessment timing, as in their words, textbook execution under field conditions that most clinicians never have to manage outside of training simulations. The trauma team's report on Park noted that the chest seal application had prevented progression from partial to complete pneumothorax during a transport window, during which deterioration would have been extremely difficult to manage. The neurosurgical report on Torres did not mince words. The window Emma had identified, monitored, and protected had been the determining factor in his survival and in the extent of his eventual recovery. Combat analysts, reviewing the engagement at the mining complex, concluded something that mattered just as much, even though it received less institutional attention. Emma's elimination of the sniper threat from the South Ridge, her disruption of the eastern flanking element during the descent, and her route selection for the ice chute evacuation had, in the analyst's assessment, directly prevented what they described as a high probability of catastrophic mission failure involving multiple additional casualties. Ryan read both reports in full before he submitted his own. His statement was longer than the standard format required. Colonel Whitfield's office would later note somewhat dryly that it was the most thorough self-assessment of command failure they had received in several years of presiding over these boards, and that thoroughness was not generally something commanding officers volunteered when describing their own errors. Ryan did not hold back. He documented the ridge crossing decision in granular detail, the time pressure, the information he had available, the information he had dismissed, and the specific cognitive bias he identified in his own thinking that had led him to discount Emma's warning before he had even fully processed its content. He documented the burial site decision with equal precision. He attached as a separate exhibit a personal reflection on what he termed his failure of imagination, his inability prior to this mission to conceive of competence existing in a form different from the form he had spent 20 years learning to recognize. He closed the statement with a formal recommendation, not for himself, for Emma. He recommended her for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, citing her actions during the burial escape and subsequent treatment of 4 combat casualties under fire. He recommended her separately for a Bronze Star with Valor device for the engagement at the mining complex and the elimination of the sniper threat. He recommended in a third and final section that her case be used with her permission as a formal training case study for incoming officers on the dangers of preconceptions about capability based on physical presentation, age, or gender. He submitted all of it without consulting her first. When Emma found out, Briggs told her with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering good news he'd been sitting on. She did not react the way Briggs perhaps expected. "He shouldn't have submitted the training case study recommendation without asking me," she said. Briggs blinked. "You don't want it." "I didn't say that." Emma considered it. "I said he should have asked. It's my name, my story, my choice whether it becomes a teaching tool for other people's blind spots." She called Ryan that afternoon. "You went over my head on the case study," she said without preamble. There was a pause on the line. "You're right," Ryan said. "I should have asked first. I got ahead of myself because I think it could actually change how people are evaluated coming into these units, and I wanted it moving before anyone could slow it down. That's not an excuse. I overstepped." Emma was quiet for a moment, weighing the apology against the gesture the way she weighed most things, not against each other, but against what was actually true. "I'll do it," she said finally. "Not because you submitted it without asking. Because I think you're right that it matters, and because if it stops even one commander from making the assumption you made, it's worth it." She paused. "But ask me next time." "I will," Ryan said. "I promise you that." "And Ryan." "Yeah. Thank you for the recommendations. The medals, I don't need them. But thank you. You earned every one of them," Ryan said. That was never in question. The only question was whether I'd have the decency to say so on paper where it counted. The medal ceremony took place at Fort Richardson on a clear morning in early December, 6 weeks after the avalanche, in a hangar large enough to accommodate the full battalion and the families who had been invited to witness it. Emma stood at attention in her dress uniform, her shoulder fully healed, her knees strong again under months of careful rehabilitation, and listened to her own citation read aloud by an officer she had never met, describing in formal military language the events of a day that she still privately experienced, less as heroism and more as a sequence of decisions that had each simply been the next right thing to do. Reyes was there walking without assistance, his daughter Sophia perched on his hip in a small winter coat, occasionally reaching up to grab at his collar with the particular fearlessness of a 2-year-old who has no idea what her father survived to be standing there holding her. Park was there, breathing easily, standing beside his wife, with his hand resting lightly against his own chest, in the unconscious habit of someone checking that everything still works the way it's supposed to. Chen was there, fully recovered, standing with a posture that suggested he had spent considerable time in physical therapy and had opinions about it that he planned to share with anyone who asked. Torres was there in a wheelchair, still working through the slower elements of his recovery. His speech improved enough that he leaned toward Webb beside him and said something that made Webb burst out laughing in the middle of an otherwise solemn ceremony, earning a sharp look from the presiding officer that neither of them seemed especially troubled by. Webb stood at attention beside Torres's chair, steady present, carrying himself like a soldier who had spent 6 weeks thinking hard about what kind of soldier he wanted to be and had arrived at an answer. And near the back of the formation, not as a principal in the ceremony, but standing tall in her navy dress uniform, with the quiet, unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent 30 years training people to survive impossible things, stood Margaret Frost. Emma had not known her mother would be there until she walked into the hangar and saw her. Maggie did not wave. Maggie did not call out. Maggie simply met her daughter's eyes across the hangar floor and gave her the smallest possible nod, the same nod Emma had been receiving from her mother since she was 7 years old and had successfully navigated her first whiteout exercise without panicking, the nod that had always meant more than any word her mother could have chosen instead. Ryan presented the Bronze Star himself as the senior officer with direct knowledge of the engagement, which was a request he had made specifically and which Colonel Whitfield had approved without hesitation. He stood in front of her, the metal box open in his hands, and for 1 second before the formal presentation began, something passed between them that the assembled crowd could not see and would not have understood, even if they had the full weight of everything between the moment he said, "She's gone on a frozen ridge," and this moment standing in front of her, in front of everyone, making sure the record reflected exactly what she had done and exactly who she was. "Petty Officer First Class Emma Frost," Ryan said, his voice carrying across the hangar, "for conspicuous gallantry and extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations against an armed enemy." He read the full citation. He did not rush it. He gave every sentence the weight it deserved. When he pinned the medal, his hands were steady. His voice was not entirely steady when he said quietly beneath the formal proceedings just for her, Every ranger in this hangar is alive because you refuse to stay buried. I will spend the rest of my career making sure no one under my command ever has to find that out the hard way again." Emma looked at him. "Good," she said, simply, the same word her mother had used on the phone 3 weeks earlier, carrying the same complete weight. The ceremony continued. Whitfield spoke. The battalion commander spoke. There were words like courage and sacrifice and example words that Emma accepted with the same composure she had brought to every other public moment of this entire ordeal, because she understood that the words mattered to the institution and to the families and to the young soldiers in the formation who needed something to aspire toward, even if the words felt slightly larger than the actual texture of what she remembered experiencing, which had been less about courage in the abstract and more about a series of specific concrete decisions made one after another under conditions that simply required her not to stop. When the formal proceedings ended and the formation broke, Emma was approached by more people than she could easily track, officers offering congratulations, the families of the men she had saved, offering something closer to reverence than gratitude. Young soldiers from other units who had heard the story and wanted, in the particular way of young soldiers everywhere, to simply be near someone who had done something extraordinary. She accepted all of it with grace. She redirected most of it gently back toward the men who had survived and the team that had executed the mission, because she did not believe the story belonged to her alone and never had. But there was one conversation that mattered more than the others, and it happened quietly off to the side of the hangar, away from the cameras and the formal photographs. When Sophia Reyes, 3 years old now, having had a birthday since the mission, the strawberry cake apparently a permanent fixture of her annual celebrations, toddled over to Emma on her own initiative and held up her arms in the universal demand of small children everywhere. Emma picked her up. Reyes watched from a few feet away, his expression doing something complicated and entirely unguarded. "She doesn't do that with strangers," he said. "I'm not a stranger," Emma said, looking at Sophia, who had found something fascinating about the medal on Emma's chest and was examining it with the intense, uncomplicated focus that only very young children bring to shiny objects. "I know all about her birthday party, the strawberry cake, the bath time I made you miss." Reyes laughed, and it carried no weight at all, just pure, unguarded relief that the man laughing was alive to do it. "Thank you," he said, quietly, beneath the noise of the hangar. "Not for the citation, not for the ceremony, for coming when you said you would, for talking to me about Sophia the whole way down that mountain when you didn't have to." Emma looked at him, at Sophia in her arms, at the entire impossible chain of decisions that had led from a cornice crack on a frozen ridge to this exact moment in this exact hangar. "That's the job," she said. "Talking to my patients matters as much as treating them. Maybe more some days." She handed Sophia back to her father, and Sophia protested briefly before being distracted by her father's collar again, and Emma watched them walk away together into the rest of their lives. Lives that existed specifically and concretely, because a woman the team had been ready to write off as expendable had refused to accept that designation. Maggie Frost found her daughter 20 minutes later, near the edge of the hangar, away from the crowd. "You did well," Maggie said. It was for her mother an extraordinary statement, the verbal equivalent of an embrace from someone who did not embrace easily or often. "I did what you taught me," Emma said. "I taught you the mountains," Maggie said. "I taught you the cold. I taught you to read snow and wind and your own body's limits. I did not teach you the part where you chose to walk toward danger instead of away from it when you had every right to walk away." She looked at her daughter for a long moment. "That part was always yours." Emma considered this. She thought about the moment at the surface of the debris field, injured and alone and entirely justified in choosing the path that led to her own safety. She thought about the moment she had chosen instead. "I think you taught me that too," Emma said. "Just not directly." Maggie almost smiled. It was a rare enough event that Emma noticed it specifically and filed it away the way she filed away things worth remembering. 6 months later, Mama was back on active duty, reassigned to a special operations medical element with an expanded scope that explicitly recognized her dual qualifications, sniper and combat medic, both a designation that her command had previously treated as somehow contradictory and now treated as a model worth replicating. Ryan Cole had been promoted. He had also, by his own choice, requested a reassignment to a training command position where he would spend the next phase of his career instructing junior officers on tactical decision-making, and where, true to his word, the Avalanche mission had become a formal case study presented with Emma's full input and approval, examined not as a story of one woman's heroism, but as a clear-eyed dissection of how assumption and bias corrupt operational judgment, and how a team can recover from catastrophic error if its leadership is honest enough to name the error and humble enough to learn from it. Webb made sergeant. Torres, after 11 months of recovery, returned to limited duty with residual but manageable deficits that he had decided, with the same stubborn determination that had carried him through selection, were not going to define what kind of soldier he remained. Reyes left active service the following year to be closer to Sophia and his wife, and sent Emma a photograph every year on Sophia's birthday strawberry cake without exception. Emma herself asked for no medals beyond what had already been awarded. No further recognition, no speaking tours or media appearances that several public affairs officers had suggested might be valuable for recruitment purposes. She declined all above it with the same quiet, unshakable composure she brought to everything, and returned to the work, the actual work, the training and the deployments, and the long hours of preparation that nobody photographed and nobody wrote citations about, because that work was the entire foundation underneath every visible moment of heroism anyone had ever witnessed her perform. She remained exactly as she had always been: quiet, professional, unassuming in the rooms where unassuming cost her nothing, and entirely immovable in the moments where movement mattered most. But every soldier who had stood in that valley with her, every ranger who had been left behind when she was buried and rescued when she returned, carried forward a single understanding that none of them would ever again allow themselves to forget. Strength does not announce itself. It does not require permission, recognition, or the approval of the room it walks into. It does not ask to be believed before it acts. It simply waits beneath the surface, patient and prepared for the exact moment when the world above it finally needs what it has been holding all along. And on the day the mountain tried to bury her, the woman everyone left for dead rose up out of the snow and carried every single one of them home.